Christmas morning shimmered with perfection, fireplace glowing, garland twinkling, and laughter rising like music. Clare stood quietly near the edge of the living room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. Across the room, her sister Jenna squealed with delight as their parents handed her a ribbon-wrapped deed. "We bought you the lakehouse," Margaret beamed, while Douglas raised a toast. Applause erupted. Someone dabbed their eyes. Clare smiled faintly. No one noticed the unmarked envelope on her lap. No bow, no announcement, just thick paper and ink that told a different story. As Jenna clutched her new keys and kissed their parents, Clare opened the envelope. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. She already knew what it contained. Because this year, the gift wasn't for her, it was from her. They had given Jenna a house. Clare? She was about to give them the truth. And they wouldn't see it coming. Clare Hart was 34 years old and had built her life on the quiet edge of competence. She worked in nonprofit grant management, the kind of job that kept food on the table for others, not just herself. Her days were filled with numbers, proposals, and outcomes. Clean, measurable impact. Predictable, steady, efficient. Just like her childhood, where everything felt earned, but never acknowledged. Clare had always been the dependable one. The one who knew how to sew her own Halloween costume when Margaret forgot to buy one. The one who stayed home from field trips to save money. The one who never cried when Jenna got the spotlight, the praise, the second chances. Jenna was the golden child. Charming, fragile, always in need of rescuing. And Douglas and Margaret were more than happy to oblige. When Clare was 9, she baked her own birthday cupcakes for her class because Margaret had to drive Jenna to ballet. No one at school thought twice. They just said she was so mature for her age. At 12, she walked to her science fair alone, carrying a model of a working volcano in a recycling bin. She won first place. Douglas didn't come. He said work had called him in. Margaret said Jenna had a sore throat and couldn't be left alone. That pattern never changed. Jenna's scraped knee always mattered more than Clare's broken wrist. Jenna's failing grades earned sympathy. Clare's straight A's earned silence. The message was clear. Clare was capable, and capable children didn't need attention, so she learned not to ask. Not to expect. She didn't complain. She didn't throw tantrums. She just folded her feelings neatly and tucked them away, like laundry she knew no one would notice. But the ache lingered. Every skipped parent-teacher meeting, every missed concert, every Christmas where Jenna received the kind of extravagant gift you'd see in a commercial. A bike, a laptop, a spring trip to Italy. Clare got practical things. Socks, a planner. One year, Douglas gave her a job listing printed from the local paper and told her it was time to start thinking about her future. She was 17. Even as an adult, the dynamics didn't shift. Clare worked hard, earned promotions, bought her own condo, and kept her life quietly in order. Jenna, on the other hand, cycled through jobs, relationships, and debt. There was always a bailout. Margaret would call and say until, one Christmas, the silence cracked. It started small, a visit to her parents' home to help move old boxes. Douglas had asked her for a favor, sorting through documents in the study. Jenna was too emotionally sensitive to deal with clutter. Clare had been sorting when she noticed something strange, a drawer slightly open, a set of folders misaligned, the kind of thing you only noticed if you were used to order. That was Clare's first clue that something was off. That Christmas morning, standing in that perfectly curated living room while Jenna was handed the deed to the lake house, Clare felt the full weight of her family's narrative pressing against her chest. They didn't see her, not really. Not when she was a child who just wanted someone to show up. Not even now, as an adult, when her name would appear on the property records they hadn't bothered to hide. She wasn't angry. She was awake. For the first time in her life, Clare wasn't wondering how to be seen. She was ready to show them what they'd overlooked. Clare's childhood was built on the quiet divide between necessity and celebration. While Jenna floated from one chaotic mess to another and was showered with sympathy and solutions, Clare received only the things she needed, never what she wanted. One Christmas, Jenna cried over the wrong brand of perfume and walked out of the room. Douglas followed her, apologizing. Clare sat on the couch with her new winter coat, gray, warm, and exactly her size. She smiled politely. No one asked if she liked it. That was the pattern. When Clare was accepted into her top college with a full scholarship, Douglas said, "That's great," without looking up from his paper. When Jenna dropped out of a 2-year program after 3 semesters, Margaret took her to the spa for a reset. Every milestone Clare reached was met with a nod, maybe a passing compliment. Meanwhile, Jenna's smallest achievements were showing up to Dexter's bar task, showing up to Thanksgiving without tears, were celebrated with applause. Once, Clare landed a competitive nonprofit fellowship. Jenna had just lost her 3rd job that year. Margaret clutched her chest and said, "We're really worried about Jenna right now." Clare was standing there with an award in her hands. And still, she nodded. The emotional math never added up. Margaret would sigh about how Jenna didn't call often enough, then somehow managed to blame Clare for not keeping the family together. When Jenna missed birthdays or holidays, the excuse was always the same. She was going through something. Clare was never allowed to be going through anything. She was the strong one. Dependable people didn't need softness. One December, Douglas handed Clare a small envelope after dinner. She expected a gift card, maybe a note. Instead, it was a job listing from a local nonprofit. "Figured this might be a better fit," he said. No wrapping, no card, just a reminder that in this family, Clare's worth was measured by function, Jenna's by feeling. Then came the visit in early December, just weeks before that fateful Christmas. Clare had offered to help organize the attic. Margaret claimed her back hurt, and Jenna said she couldn't handle the dust. As usual, Clare was left to do the work. While hauling boxes down the hallway, she passed Douglas's office. The door was open, which was unusual. He always kept it locked. A drawer was left ajar. Papers were slightly askew. Clare paused. Something about it felt wrong. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon, but there was a chill in that room that had nothing to do with winter. She didn't go rifling through it. Not yet. But she saw enough to know it wasn't just old tax forms. There were property records, folders with thick paper, and her name, partially visible on a document. She made a mental note. Something was off. The house might be decorated with garlands and twinkling lights, but beneath the tinsel was a truth no one had ever bothered to tell her. And this time, Clare wasn't going to look away. A week after her visit to help with the attic, Clare returned to her parents' home under the pretense of dropping off holiday cookies. Margaret was busy fussing over table linens, and Jenna was nowhere to be seen. Douglas was out running errands. The timing felt right. She walked calmly to the study, heart steady, and closed the door behind her. The drawer she had seen ajar last time was still slightly open. This time, she pulled it fully open and carefully removed a thick manila envelope. It was sealed, heavy, and labeled in neat handwriting, "To be opened upon death." She hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside was a copy of a will, notarized. Her name appeared first. Clare Elizabeth Hart, listed next to a parcel number she instantly recognized, the lakehouse property. Her heart pounded, but she kept reading. The language was clear. She was designated owner. But it didn't make sense. She had never agreed to this, never signed anything. Beneath the will were photocopies of property deeds and bank documents. Then came the shock. Her signature on a mortgage release form, another on a transfer authorization, another on a trust declaration. None of them were hers. Her throat went dry. She flipped through the stack, eyes scanning every forged loop and curve of her name. It was unmistakable. Someone had used her identity, used her credit, used her name. Clare sat back slowly, mind racing. This was calculousness. This was Peaceman tied by Fredadune. But in truth, it had been shielded by using Clare's records, Clare's clean financial standing, Clare's quiet reliability. She thought back to every time she was praised for being stable, responsible, invisible. And now she understood why. Her predictability made her the perfect cover. Jenna's business had failed 2 years earlier. Margaret and Douglas had panicked. Jenna couldn't qualify for a mortgage. But Clare could. She always paid her bills. She was useful, just not important enough to be told the truth. Sitting there in the study, with the will spread across Douglas's polished oak desk, Clare felt something break loose. This wasn't just emotional neglect. This was financial exploitation. And it had been going on quietly, like a leak behind a wall, rotting the structure she thought was family. Her hands didn't tremble as she reassembled the papers and returned everything exactly as she found it. This time, she didn't feel small. She felt clear. The lakehouse wasn't a gift. It was a shield, and she had been the one holding it up without even knowing. She stepped out of the study and back into the kitchen, where Margaret was slicing cranberries. No one noticed her expression had changed. Clare smiled softly, thanked her mother for the cookies, and left. But inside, everything was different. Not yet. She had something better in mind, something they would never expect. Clare drove home in silence, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The city lights blurred through the windshield, but her thoughts were crystal clear. Once inside her apartment, she didn't bother to turn on the Christmas lights or hang her coat. She sat down at her dining table, opened her carpet reports. Page by page, the truth began to build a clearer, more chilling picture. There were accounts she didn't recognize, quiet transfers between family-held trusts, and authorizations that had her signature, but she had never signed them. Documents linked her name to a property trust filed 2 years earlier, around the time Jenna's second business failed. That trust had shielded the lakehouse from foreclosure, transferring liability onto Clare's credit profile. She checked her score. It had dipped slightly months ago, and she hadn't paid it much attention. Now, it made sickening sense. By the next morning, she was on the phone with Monica Gates, a college friend who had gone into estate law. Monica listened patiently as Clare cooed Santiago, sending scanned documents and emails as they talked. After a long pause, Monica said, "Clare, this isn't just shady. This could be criminal. They used your identity, possibly committed fraud, and manipulated fraud scandal to their advantage. You need to protect yourself." Clare didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, feeling the full weight of a betrayal that had been dressed in family warmth for years. Margaret's soft tones, Douglas's firm reassurances, all of it now tainted by the knowledge that her trust had been taken and twisted. She thought about Jenna and her dramatics, the chaos always excused. About every time she'd heard, "You're so lucky to be strong." But being strong wasn't lucky. It had made her invisible, and now, exploitable. But Clare wasn't the same girl who baked her own birthday cupcakes and swallowed disappointment like medicine. This time, she would act, quietly, strategically, with the same steadiness they'd always relied on. But this time, for herself. She created a shell LLC under a neutral name. Monica helped her build a paper trail that couldn't be traced back to her directly. Through a private broker, Clare made discreet inquiries about purchasing the lakehouse. The property had technically changed hands into a trust controlled by Douglas and Margaret. But thanks to the forged documents, Clare's name still held partial legal standing. Monica filed a quiet title action. It wasn't public. It didn't make noise. But it would allow Clare to buy out the trust's interest from behind the curtain. Her purchase wouldn't raise alarms. At least, not until it was too late. With every legal step, Clare reclaimed a piece of herself, not out of revenge, but to take back the space where her name had been used like a signature stamp for other people's mistakes. The lakehouse had always been Jenna's fantasy, but it had been Clare's financial burden. Not anymore. As she reviewed the final filings, Clare realized this wasn't about the house at all. It was about visibility, about no longer being used as the silent scaffold that held everyone else's dreams. When the paper was done and the deed transferred, she sat with it in her lap. Her name, legally etched, no one else's. For the first time in her life, Clare Hart had something that couldn't be taken. Not stolen, not rewritten. And it was only the beginning. Christmas morning came again, exactly 1 year later. Same cinnamon rolls slightly burnt at the edges, Same wreath on the front door, same artificial smiles stretched across familiar faces. Clare arrived on time, wrapped in a gray wool coat, carrying a single white box in her gloved hands. No one paid it much attention. Margaret fluttered between the kitchen and living room, brushing flour off her apron. Douglas poured mimosas. Jenna, dressed in a new cashmere set, positioned herself strategically near the tree, waiting for her moment. Clare took a seat near the window as she always did. Quiet, present, easily ignored. Margaret handed Jenna a large designer bag with a gleaming gold logo. Jenna squealed and hugged her mother, tears welling in her eyes as she pulled out matching shoes and a coat. "You always know exactly what I love," she said, beaming. Everyone clapped. Clare smiled faintly. Nothing had changed. Not on the surface. When the noise died down, Clare stood and walked toward her father. She handed Douglas the white box with both hands. "This is for you," she said calmly. Jenna rolled her eyes. "You didn't have to do gifts this year, Clare." "It's fine." Clare said nothing. Douglas opened the lid, confused. Inside, he found a stack of official-looking papers. The first was the deed to the lakehouse. Legal, filed, irrevocable. Clare's name printed clearly at the top. Below it, in a separate sleeve, was a photocopy of a forged signature. Clare's Ferd. Alongside a notarized statement from her attorney, confirming its illegitimacy and legal ramifications. Margaret leaned in, frowning. "What is this?" she asked, voice thin. Douglas's eyes darted over the pages, his hands beginning to tremble. Jenna reached out and took the documents, scanning the contents quickly. "What do you mean it's in your name?" she snapped. "The lakehouse is mine." Clare met her gaze and spoke quietly. "No, it's not. It never was. You used me, my name, my credit, to keep it from going under. You all did. But now, it belongs to me, fully, permanently, and I won't be sharing it." The room went still. Margaret let out a sharp breath, one hand clutching the back of the couch. Douglas opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jenna blinked rapidly, as if trying to process something too big to understand. "You can't just do this," she said, her voice rising. "You can't take it like this." Clare's voice remained steady. "I didn't take anything. I reclaimed what was stolen. You used my name for your benefit. Now I've used it for mine." Jenna stood up, her new purse gripped tightly in her lap. "This is insane," she whispered. "Mom, say something." Margaret looked at Clare with a kind of stunned betrayal, as if Clare had broken an unspoken family rule. "You could have talked to us," she said quietly. "We would have figured it out as a family." Clare's expression didn't waver. "You did figure it out, as a family, without me. I was just the tool, the paperwork, the silent signature you didn't think I'd notice." She looked down at the document still in Jenna's hand. "Now you've noticed." Silence fell over the room like fresh snow. No shouting, no tears. Just the soft hum of consequence settling into every corner. Clare picked up her coat and moved toward the door. "Merry Christmas," she said simply. Jenna started to speak, but nothing came out. Margaret looked away. Douglas remained still, holding the edge of the box like it was a live wire. At the doorway, Clare turned once more. "By the way," she added, "the title was transferred 6 weeks ago. You've been vacationing in a house that doesn't belong to you." Jenna's mouth dropped open. Douglas's hand slipped from the box. Margaret sat down hard on the arm of the sofa. Then Clare laughed. No fanfare, no slammed doors, just the sound of her heels on the porch, her breath fogging in the cold. The performance was over. They had played their parts for years. But now, the script had changed. And Clare Hart was no longer the background character. She was the author. And she had written the final scene. Clare stepped into the crisp air, the cold biting gently at her cheeks as snow began to fall in light flurries. She didn't look back at the house she'd just left behind. Her coffee was still on the table, half full, cooling beside the untouched cranberry tart. But none of that mattered. She walked calmly to her car, started the engine, and drove without turning on the radio. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, solid, hers. The drive to the lake house took a little under 2 hours. The roads were quiet, the sky gray but calm. When she pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it had the last time she visited, only now it wasn't draped in someone else's fantasy. It didn't belong to Jenna. It was borrowed. It was Claire's, legally, entirely. The deed was tucked safely in her glove compartment, but she didn't need to see it to believe it. Inside, the house wasn't perfect. The chimney still smoked if she didn't crack a window, and the floor in the upstairs hallway squeaked loud enough to wake a light sleeper. But there was something grounding in its imperfections. She made herself tea, curled up on the couch with a blanket, and watched the lake through the frosted window. No texts came in, no calls, no frantic follow-ups from Douglas, no guilt-riddled pleas from Margaret, not even a half-hearted meme from Jenna. And for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt untouchable. Claire thought about everything they had taken over the years, not just credit or identity, but time, presence, worth. She had been the scaffolding holding up everyone else's stories, the solid one, the quiet one, the dependable background. But that version herself had been retired the moment she bought this house in her name and claimed it without apology. It wasn't just a home, it was a turning point. She didn't crave their love anymore. She didn't ache for recognition. She didn't want them to see her differently. What she wanted, what she finally had, was sovereignty, a life unmediated by expectation or obligation. Every forged signature had pushed her further into the shadows. Now, every notarized stamp on that deed pulled her back into the light. There was no dramatic celebration. Claire didn't pour champagne or post a picture online. She simply lit the fireplace, put on soft music, and pulled out the notebook she kept by her bed. On the first page, she wrote, "I exist on my own terms now." Then she flipped to a clean page and started drafting a grant proposal for a women's resource initiative you've been dreaming about for years. It was time to invest in other people, like women who were done being tools in someone else's story. She glanced toward the deed, folded neatly beside her. It wasn't about revenge. It never really had been. It was about proof. Proof that she wasn't just resilient, she was right. She was worthy. And she didn't need anyone else to say so. That single piece of paper meant more than any holiday gift she'd ever received. It was a contract with herself. A promise. Never again invisible. Never again used. And the best part? She didn't need applause. She didn't need the audience to clap. The moment she walked away from that living room and back into her own life, Claire had already won. Months passed quietly at the lake house. Winter melted into a slow, damp spring, and Claire remained. The silence stretched long, but it didn't ache. No calls came from Margaret, no emails from Douglas. Jenna sent a single meme in late February, a glittery gif that read, "Family over everything," with a winking emoji. Claire didn't reply. She simply deleted it and moved on. Not out of anger, not even out of disappointment, just clarity. She was done. Her days developed their own rhythm. Mornings began with tea by the window and journaling, sometimes pages of reflections, sometimes just a single sentence. She planted herbs in the windowsill. She repainted the baseboards. She learned how to replace a light fixture without calling for help. None of it was glamorous, but it was hers. She didn't broadcast her progress. No social media posts. No photos. Just small, steady acts of reclamation. Rebuilding herself from the inside out. The quiet that once would have felt like punishment now felt like peace. She let go of the longing, the hope that her parents would one day understand her, that Jenna would see her as more than a utility. That yearning had lived inside her for decades, and now, finally, It had no place here. The air was too clean, the space too sacred. She didn't tell people the full story. When old coworkers called to catch up, she simply said she was taking a break, enjoying a new chapter. No one pried. Maybe they sensed it. The groundedness in her voice. The way she no longer tried to justify her absence from other people's lives. There were moments of sadness, fleeting and sharp, like phantom pain. A random memory would surface. Margaret brushing Jenna's hair at the kitchen table while Clare said it, unnoticed. Douglas clapping at Jenna's graduation, but skipping Clare's. These images came uninvited, but they no longer held power. They drifted in, and Clare let them go. She thought about writing a letter, something final, something neat. But then she realized there was nothing left to explain. They knew what they did. They knew she knew. That was enough. The deed to the lakehouse stayed locked in her filing cabinet. She didn't need to look at it every day. Just knowing it was there was enough. It wasn't about the property. It was about the boundary it created. A clean line. A new start. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She had everything she needed. A home. Her name. Her story. Back in her own hands. And most of all, she had herself. Entirely. Finally. Clare Hart no longer lived for the possibility of love that never came. She lived for her mornings. Her quiet. Her next grant proposal. Her dog-eared books and imperfect floors. She didn't need anyone to witness it. She had witnessed enough. And now, she was free. Things they thought silence was loyalty. I turned it into armor. Every quiet moment they mistook for weakness was actually me watching, learning, preparing. They used my name like a shield, a blank signature to cover Jenna's failures and preserve their illusion of control. But I used that same name to take back what was mine. My identity, my stability, my power. I thought I didn't see the pattern. That I would keep playing my part as the dependable daughter, the silent bystander, the afterthought. But I saw everything. I wasn't the quiet one. I was the observer. And now, I'm the owner. Of my home. Of my choices. Of my story. I don't need their apologies. I don't need to sit at their table anymore. I've built my own, and it's stronger than anything they ever gave me. So, if you've ever felt like the invisible one, the one expected to hold everything together while getting nothing in return, know this. You're not powerless, you're not forgotten, and you are not alone. If you've ever been written out of your own family's script, remember, the best revenge isn't confrontation. It's freedom. It's peace. It's living fully off the page. My name is Clare Hart, and I rewrote the ending they tried to give me. Subscribe to Veiled Fury for more stories where women take their power back. One secret, one truth, one victory at a time. Your story matters. Your silence holds strength. And your voice is just getting started.